Okay, imagine this. We all hear about literacy for all in schools, right? It sounds perfect. Every kid learning to read and write. But what if that promise, what if it has a hidden catch? What if the way it's set up actually excludes a whole group of kids? Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really digging into some fascinating insights from Dr. Jaime Hoerricks' work, building classrooms where both Gestalt and analytic learners thrive. Our mission really is to unpack how we even define literacy in the system, and why some learners get, well, pushed to the margins. Dr. Hoerricks suggests it might not always be unintentional. We want to look at the big shifts needed to actually serve every child. We're going deep, looking at the structures underneath. We're drawing straight from Dr. Hoerricks' analysis here. It really shines a light on how these systemic things impact learning in subtle ways. So by the end of this, you'll have a much clearer picture of what's behind universal literacy. You'll see this hidden class divide and who gets support. And hopefully, discover some real ways we can push for a truly inclusive future in schools. Prepare for maybe a few aha moments that might shift how you see things. All right, let's start with this big idea Dr. Hoerricks challenges. Literacy for all. She calls it a false universal. What does she mean by that exactly?
Well, the education system, pretty much by design, really promotes what Dr. Hoerricks identifies as the analytic pathway for learning language. This is the one most of us know, teaching kids to break words down into sounds, phones, segmenting them, decoding letters like it's a puzzle.
Right, like learning ABCs, then phonics, sounding out CAT. It seems so logical, almost like the way to learn, the standard way.
Exactly. It's presented as the natural, the default, maybe even the only real way. It's systematic, you can measure it easily, but, and this is key, Dr. Hoerricks points to another way, just as valid, the Gestalt pathway.
Gestalt. Okay, how does that work?
So instead of breaking things down, these kids take language as whole chunks. They recall phrases, rhythms, intonations, meaning comes from these remembered units. Think about a kid who perfectly scripts a line from a movie to tell you something, or repeats a jingle. That's them using language, just differently, not piece by piece initially.
Okay, can picture that. So there's a different approach to language. How does the system typically view this Gestalt way of learning?
Well, that's the problem. It's not just ignored. It often gets actively relabeled as a deficit, dysfunction, or delay.
Wow, okay. So not just different, but wrong.
Kind of, yeah. Kids learning this way are seen as failing to meet the analytic standard. Their way of engaging isn't recognized as legitimate, just lacking.
So bringing it back to that promise of literacy for all, what's the fundamental contradiction Dr. Hoerricks is pointing out here?
It's this huge gap, right? The system promises universality for all, but the way it's built actually excludes those who don't fit its preferred analytic mold.
So the promise and the practice don't line up.
Precisely. The natural way it promotes is actually a constructed norm, not the only way humans learn language.
Okay, now let's make this concrete. How does this actually play out? You mentioned California and how access to support ties into socioeconomic status.
Yeah, it's a stark example. You see, families with money can often buy services from private speech-language therapists, SLTs. And crucially, many of these private SLTs are trained in something called natural language acquisition, or NLA. NLA is important because it recognizes and works with both analytic and Gestalt learners.
Ah, so they get specialized support that understands their way of learning.
Exactly. These private sessions can be really attentive, nuanced, sustained. They honor how the child is actually processing language, but it comes at a cost.
It's paywalled expertise.
That's exactly how Dr. Hoerricks puts it. The expertise is commodified, priced, and rationed by ability to pay. So a child's chance to really thrive, to be understood, it can literally depend on their family's income.
A clear class divide then.
Absolutely.
So what about the kids whose families can't afford that? What's the situation like for SLTs in the public school system?
Well, it's often the polar opposite. Public school SLTs are frequently drowning in impossible caseloads. We're talking hundreds of kids spread across multiple schools sometimes.
That sounds incredibly stretched thin.
It is, and it forces their work into these immediate, measurable boxes, articulation drills, filling out forms, endless paperwork. The deeper collaborative work needed for diverse learners, it gets pushed aside.
So they become more like functionaries.
Dr. Hoerricks uses that exact word. Their expertise gets hemmed in, their autonomy reduced. What could be really transformative work becomes, just managing the workload. Alienated labor, she calls it.
Now, some might say, well, that's just budget cuts. That's the market. How does Dr. Hoerricks use something like critical theory to argue this is more intentional,
Like-
more structural.
Right. She pushes back hard against the idea that it's just an accident. She argues it's structural. That capital, essentially, has concentrated the conditions for that really good attentive care in the private sphere,
Yeah.
while systematically kind of starving the public system. She even points to specific policy things like political attacks on public workers.
Like the loan forgiveness example.
Exactly. She mentions the gutting of public service loan forgiveness under a prior administration, making it economically really hard for young therapists to choose public service, even if they want to.
So it shrinks the pool of people available for those public roles.
Right. Not because the need isn't there, but because the system makes it almost impossible for them to afford to do the work.
So for most families, the default is a public system that's under-resourced, staffed by overloaded professionals.
Yeah.
And your access to being truly understood and supported hinges on your income. That's, a powerful and disturbing class contradiction.
It really lays bare how the system can end up protecting private interests over public good.
This whole analysis really forces you to look beyond just seeing a child as having a deficit. And Dr. Hoerricks brings in frameworks like the power thread, meaning framework, PTMF, and critical theory. How do these help us understand?
So PTMF is really useful here. Instead of asking what's wrong with this child, it asks different questions like who has the power here? How are they using it? What meanings are being imposed on this child and their way of learning?
Okay, shifting the focus from the individual to the system.
Exactly. So the problem isn't that Gestalt learners are broken. The problem is the system denies their way of making meaning valid. And then adding insult to injury, it sells the fix privately.
So the framework helps reveal that power dynamic. It's about redistributing power, not just fixing the kid.
Right. And critical theory sharpens that point. It helps us see that the analytic way isn't just naturally best. It's been socially constructed as the norm.
Constructed for a reason.
Yes, it serves specific functions. It makes it easier for schools to measure kids, sort them, standardize them. It fits the system's needs.
So the kid who can decode quickly on a test looks proficient.
While the kid weaving a story from remembered phrases, which is actually really complex and creative, might just look behind or even non-compliant, according to those narrow measures.
Wow. So using PTMF and critical theory really exposes the mechanics of it all.
It makes it visible. The invisibility of Gestalt processing isn't just an oversight, it's functional. It serves the system's need for standardization, for things that are easily counted, and ultimately for things that fit a marking logic. Gestalt processing is harder to break down and sell, so it gets ignored.
So we have this rhetoric of inclusion, literacy for all, but the practice is often exclusion. What looks like objective science is actually favoring one mode, dismissing what doesn't fit the mold.
It's a deep contradiction.
But it's not all doom and gloom. Dr. Hoerricks does point towards hope, towards potential for change, right? Even using existing tools like SLTs and IEPs.
Absolutely. Take the SLT in the school. As we said, they're often stuck in this narrow technical box, fix the harsh sound, manage the paperwork.
Treated like a technician.
Right. But their training actually gives them so much more, a deep understanding of language development, identity, literacy. They could be central figures in changing how classrooms operate. They could bridge the gap.
How so? What could that look like?
Well, imagine an SLT who understands NLA, who understands Gestalt processing. They hold what Dr. Hoerricks calls counter-knowledge, knowledge that runs counter to the dominant analytic-only view.
Okay.
Now, if that SLT dares to bring that knowledge into an IEP meeting, or suggests co-planning a lesson with a teacher, or runs a little training, they're resisting that technician label.
They're acting as advocates for different ways of learning.
Exactly. They're widening that circle of who gets recognized. Even small acts of bringing that knowledge into the open can start to shift things. It's resistance.
And then there's the IEP, the Individualized Education Program. You mentioned it's technically a legal contract.
Yeah, on paper, an IEP is powerful. It's legally binding on the school district. It outlines the support a child is supposed to receive.
But in reality?
In reality, as many families know, it can feel like fragile paperwork. It gets skimmed, maybe not fully implemented. Corners get cut when resources are tight.
So there's a tension there, too. The legal promise versus the daily experience.
Big tension. Dr. Hoerricks calls the IEP a site of struggle. It's where the official promises meet the real-world constraints. But, and this is important because it is a legal document, families and advocates can use it.
Use it how? As a lever?
As a lever, or even, she says, sometimes as a weapon, a tool to demand the school district actually does what the IEP says to make them live up to their commitments.
So each IEP meeting can become this this little battleground.
In a way, yes. An arena where power is negotiated, where families insist the state meets its obligations. It exposes the gap between the law and the practice, and sometimes you can pry open those cracks a little wider.
Okay, so we've seen the problem, the critiques, the potential sites of resistance. What about the positive vision? What could classrooms actually look like if we embrace this? Dr. Hoerricks offers concrete ideas, right?
She does. It's not just critique, it's about building something different. For instance, she talks about co-designing literacy activities
Co-designing
between the classroom teacher and the SLT. Imagine learning stations in a literacy block. Maybe one station really focuses on phonics, decoding great for analytic learners. But then another station, equally valued, invites kids to build stories using scripts they know, to play with rhythm and remembered phrases, validating the Gestalt approach.
So both pathways are there. Both are seen as legitimate parts of learning literacy, not one better than the other.
Exactly. It's about recognizing them in relation to each other, both necessary for different kids or even the same kid at different times.
And how does this connect back to those IEP goals? Can they be changed too?
Definitely. IEP goals themselves can reflect this dual understanding, instead of only measuring progress by how well a child decodes phonemes.
Which is often the main focus.
Right. Instead, you co-plan goals that also value how a child builds, meaning using scripts, how they use chunks of language purposefully. Writing those goals down challenges that built-in bias towards the analytic.
It puts the recognition into the official document.
It inscribes it legally. The system then has to acknowledge it, at least on paper, which is a start.
And what about sharing this knowledge? Does the SLT keep their NLA understanding to themselves?
No, that's crucial. Dr. Hoerricks stresses collective training. The SLT needs to share their understanding of NLA with the classroom teachers.
So teachers can recognize it too.
Yes. When teachers learn to spot NLA stages, when they understand that scripting isn't just nonsense talk or the child avoiding work, but actually language in motion, it changes everything.
I could see how that would shift the whole classroom environment, how a teacher interacts with a child.
It transforms practice, transforms the culture. It builds that shared understanding needed for genuine inclusion. And Dr. Hoerricks is really clear. This isn't just about being nicer or finding best practices. This kind of collaboration, teachers, SLTs, families working together to recognize all learners, she calls it praxis.
Praxis, meaning theory put into action.
Yes, theory and action, intertwined. It's the collective effort, standing against a system that often demands everyone learns the same way. It's an act of solidarity.
It's about saying education belongs to everyone who walks in the door, however they learn.
Precisely. Refusing to let language be boxed in.
Wow. Imagine really moving beyond just accommodating differences to actively affirming and valuing every single way kids make meaning. That feels...
Yeah, like revolutionary hope, not just tweaking the edges, making education truly a common good. So let's recap quickly. Today, we've journeyed through Dr. Jaime Hoerricks' work, looking at that false universal of literacy, the class divide in support, how power shapes who gets seen, and the potential for SLTs and IEPs, not just as tools of the system, but maybe as tools for changing the system, leading towards real collaboration. As we wrap up thinking about all this, what really stands out to you is the most critical piece from Dr. Hoerricks' analysis. That's a tough one. But I think it might be recognizing those deep contradictions, like in the IEP process, and realizing they aren't just flaws, they're places where change can happen. Which leads to a question for you, our listener. How might seeing these contradictions, understanding these power dynamics, actually empower you? How could it help you advocate for all learners, maybe even outside of schools?
That's a powerful question to sit with. And Dr. Hoerricks really frames the ultimate task, doesn't she? Moving past just inclusion as a buzzword towards real solidarity, transforming education into something truly shared. She makes it clear the future depends on whether we confront these contradictions head-on. Do we demand a system where every child's way of learning is recognized, or do we let these inequalities just get deeper?
The work she emphasizes is urgent.